Thanks. Heyo. Whoa, it's bright up here. I also need to be able to see my slides. Oh, they're in front of me. Perfect. Hi, it's Friday afternoon. Are you guys as awake as I am? I hope so. Okay. Yeah, so I want to talk about NFT trades. So I'm assuming most people probably know what an NFT is and probably have seen various traits. So I'm the person that explores them. I guess a little bit about me just quickly. I'm a user experience designer in Web3, and I kind of have a background in both like heavy analytics and research, and also graphic design and data viz. So this is kind of culminated in curiosity and being in Web3, as I'm sure most of you are as well. So why did I choose to explore traits like on a bigger scale? I used to work for the Hash Masks for 1.5 years, which is kind of, I guess, an OG NFT project. And the traits were really complex. And one of the things that I did is I updated the metadata on OpenSea to reflect that complexity. And as a result, I got like super excited to deep dive that complexity. And just to even give an example of like when you visualize something, how much you gain from that, from just like sorting filters on OpenSea, the graphic on the left there is one that I made to show that like if you just sorted by a mask, you would see all the various masks in the middle. But then if you went into the sub-traits, you would have a way better understanding of some of the masks that are there. So before, people couldn't really sort by the different types of masks, like face or symmetrical in that example. And now they can. So that was something that I did, and I got really excited about it, that I'm like, well, what about other traits? And like, who did what first in certain projects? And I was really curious about this, so I decided to go on a little journey. So this is my third kind of like talk at this conference about it. The first one I did gold trait, then I did 3D glasses in London, and I'm gonna do 2 traits today. But briefly, I want to talk about how I get my data, because I'm a data person, and I think that's super important to share with you guys. So of course, OpenSea has an API you can tap into. And I do that with Python code. And so my criteria of my data set, so when I talk about the projects in my data, I have 721 tokens. It's a supply of over 1,000 for my criteria. That's what I looked up. And the total volume had to be over 0.001s, because last time I tried this, you just get too many projects that have never had volume. So I wanted to make sure that there's actually a project that had a little bit of volume. The reason why I chose the supply to be over 1,000 is because I did want to focus on projects that have layered traits. At first, when I did this, I had about 3,000 projects because I took the most like 150 prominent wallets that had about 500,000 NFTs. But recently, I found out that my code works on 18,000 wallets to pull all of the collections within those. So now on proof of work, my data set has 7,699, and I love that there's a 69 in there for the memes. So 7,700 projects, 92% of those projects ended up having traits, which is wild. And actually, the other 8% that's missing, a lot of them are collections that are passes. So they're 721 tokens, but they don't have traits, right? Because they're not collections that are PFPs. There's some limitations to this. I could be missing some projects in my data set. Some items are delisted, so I don't capture that. And what I do after is I can query my data set. So for this, I queried crown and I queried hoodie to kind of give a little overview. But I do want to say that anything I talk about from the data side in terms of projects, not because I looked into their community or the founders or anything on that side of projects, purely from the data side. So I wanted to do the crown trait. The people have spoken. They wanted the hoodie. So I thought, let's do both. So this is what I've discovered. I think the most interesting insight into looking into this that I found is that there were projects, so there was 2,600 or so projects that had one trait for crown. And then for the hoodie, it was about the same, so 35%, 30%. But what was interesting is when I looked at when the project had more than one trait, of course, the crown appears way less, right? So there are a few projects, only 7%, that actually had the crown more than once, whereas the hoodie goes wild, like lots of different designs, lots of different colors, so way more projects, like 1,649 that ended up having different kinds of hoodies, whereas with the crown, there's only 196 in my data set that have more than one kind of crown. Let's go deeper. So the highest volume project with the crown, of course, is BAYC, and then the CryptoPunks for the hoodie. The very first project in my database that had a crown trait is something called Ethmoji by OpenSea. I didn't even know OpenSea had a project until I pulled it in my data set, and I'm like, why, are you serious? This is crazy. Came out in March of of 2018. I thought it was really wild. I'm like, okay, cool. And then, of course, the punks were the first that had the hoodie. But then I'm like, okay, but I'm doing both. So why not see which project was the first project with both traits? And it turns out it's these Nico official cats that came out in 2021 that have both traits. So then I went even into a little bit of a deeper dive into this idea of both, because I got curious about it. So there's an interesting thing that happens in the collections the deeper I went. So on the one hand, there are collections like Oni One Force, for example, where if you query both head, crown, and hoodie, their way that the data is set up and OpenSea displays it, you actually don't get an appearance at all of any, because they don't have an instance of a PFP that is wearing a hoodie and has a crown, right? But if you look at something like the humanoids, because it's under one category of head, you get a crown and a hoodie, but not at the same time. And then there's a bunch of collections that decided, you know what, why not just, let the people have both? More's better. So they decided to both have a hoodie and a crown on a project, and there's more examples of those happening, which I think is really cool. Diving the hoodie trait a little deeper, I decided to look at nomenclature, meaning like what names are associated with traits. So the most common name for the hoodie trait, of course, is clothes, and then clothing, and then body, and then outfit. Those are the top 5. And then the Sankey plot here just kind of gives you that breakdown. And what I found most interesting is after just having a generic name of hoodie for the trait, it's the black hoodie that's the most common. Then the red, then the blue, then the green, pink, yellow. You could see the breakdown. And then it gets funny, because this is where I'm responsible now for cleaning this data set, because then we go hoodie blue, hoodie red, hoodie black, right? Like people get funny with the names. So this is just kind of raw data at first. Eventually I'll create a separate database that associates a lot of this, like I did for 3D glasses, where like anaglyph glasses and 3D glasses mean the same thing. But it's a really interesting way to look at this, because clothing and clothes are the same thing. So eventually I'll end up creating a data set that combines that. So it's a lot easier to look it up across all of the 7,000 plus projects. So then I took a little deep dive into the crown trait. And this one I thought was really, really interesting. So the top 5 trait categories are head, hat, headwear, hats, hair. It's a little bit more diverse in how people decide to name this trait. And it's really fun to think about, right? Like if you're creating a project and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, we got to have traits. What are we going to do? And someone out there is like this designated linguist in a project, right? That's going to decide what people will query a whole project by, but pretty much the entirety of its life. And like, I don't know if we even as like a community think about that job, right? I do, because I get to deal with it on this end in my data, and it's really interesting to me. And I know initially I applied to have this talk in the future stage, because I actually think all of this informs future projects, if you think about it. Like what can you do, what should you not do? It's very interesting in terms of seeing like repetition of traits that are still present in projects and things that are kind of abandoned. But in terms of the crown trait, I decided to do a fun little like word cloud just to really kind of point out that, of course, just crown is the one that is used the most. So in terms of traits, 1,390 projects are like, hey, you know what? Crown, good enough, we're good. And I mean, there's a lot of different like diversity in what those crowns look like, but we're just gonna mass label a crown. And then the second one is gold crown. And then we got a lot of royalty going out. We've got king's crown, king crown, flower crown. I was surprised. I was like, okay, that's really interesting. So there's flower crown, and then golden, back to that kind of idea, black crown, king's crown, queen. So a lot of kind of royal stuff going on. But definitely found interesting that there's so much in terms of cultural association with crowns. So if I look even deeper into the set, where it gets a little bit like less prominent, you see like ice crown, fire crown, references to like mythical stuff, references to royalty, references to florals. And yeah, it's really wonderful to actually think about like the collective cultural diversity of the various traits. And this is just like such a small little dive of all of that into the crown. And yeah, it's really expansive. So I'm pretty excited about it. And all of that is culminating in a couple of things. I'm working on a coffee table book, and that coffee table book is going to be all about this research that I'm super excited to put out, because I think it's really fascinating, and I just think everybody should experience it. But the other thing that I'm excited about is, like, if you're thinking about projects, especially if you're creating a project, I think it's really interesting to look at that past of what's been created, because time and time again, certain traits we keep and some traits we abandon. But I think if you are aware of all of the history of it, like that's kind of where the innovation lies, is knowing what has come before to think about what you can come up with that's completely new. So yeah. Anyway, I'll stop there. I don't want to take up more time. I'm running out of time, I see. But yeah, I'm Outer Lumen. My DMs are open if you have questions about traits or data or any of that. But thanks so much for coming and for listening. I appreciate it.